Hi, everyone, and welcome to Yellowstone Native Fish Conservation Program update. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Linda, and I work in the superintendent's office and will be your host today. We are joined today by Todd Koel, who is the leader of Yellowstone's Native Fish Conservation Program. And Todd will be presenting more about the program along with the updates for the 2024 fishing and boating season shortly. Before I pass it on over to Todd, I want to briefly go over how you can submit your questions for today's question and answer session. On your screen, you will see an icon in the shape of two chat bubbles, and one of those bubbles will include a question mark. This is the Q&A function. By clicking on this icon, you will bring up the Q&A box where you can submit your questions. Please feel free to use this feature anytime during Todd's presentation. Next, I want to let you know that this meeting will be recorded. If you are unable to stay for the entire meeting, you can either click on the pause button and resume it later, or you can exit out of the meeting and watch the recording at a later time. The recording of this meeting will be posted by tomorrow on the Fish Management page on Yellowstone's website. You'll find the link to this page in the Q&A box. And finally, we have a couple of resources and helpful links about fishing and boating in Yellowstone, which we will now share with you in the Q&A box. I'll pass it on over to Todd so that he can start his presentation.
Hey, everybody. I think I'm live now. Does that look right, Ashton?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today. Very much appreciated. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects, that we've been working on for many, many years here, and then some of the newer stuff coming up. And so I'll just kind of dive into it. If you're wondering, that's a photo of the Upper Yellowstone River, just south of the park boundary. And one of our interns, Sadie, fishing there this past year, where the cutthroat trout migrate back to spawn in June and July each year. It's a beautiful spot. So today I'd like to talk to you about our Yellowstone Lake restoration program, including our lake trout suppression efforts and the cutthroat response that we're seeing to that work. We'll also talk a little bit about our conservation efforts in streams, mostly in the northern regions of the park for cutthroat and grayling. And then we'll conclude with some discussion about angling regulations and aquatic invasive species prevention efforts here in the park. So we'll start with Yellowstone Lake. The Yellowstone Lake, of course, is home to our native Yellowstone cutthroat trout. It's the sole trout of the lake. There were no other trout in the lake. In fact, there was just only one minnow species other than the cutthroat there. So over time, they became really important ecologically in the lake and connected streams. But lake trout, which are not native to Yellowstone or anywhere in the West, became introduced to Yellowstone Lake and were first found in 1994. And since then, we've been working hard to suppress the non-native lake trout population. Because the lake trout are large predatory fish, which the cutthroat trout within Yellowstone Lake are not accustomed to. So they're pretty easy prey for the lake trout. So these lake trout are predatory. They feed on the native cutthroat trout. They live only within the lake. They don't spawn in connected streams like the cutthroat trout do. They live deep within the lake generally. They're extremely long-lived. They can live 30 or 40 years or more if they're not gill-netted. And they produce thousands of eggs. Each of the females can produce thousands of eggs, especially the bigger females. So the non-native lake trout have had a pretty significant impact on our native cutthroat trout. And by doing so, they've affected the ecology of this ecosystem right in the heart of Yellowstone National Park. And that's why we're working so hard to suppress the non-native lake trout. So we suppress the lake trout by a gill netting suppression program, which includes several boats, many of which are actually operated by contractors. The contract gill netting crews that operate on the lake from mid-May to late May through mid-October each year. So we have several large gill netting vessels that operate across Yellowstone Lake. And the colored lines, the sort of squiggly lines on this map, are the gill nets set this past summer by each of the different gill netting vessels that work across Yellowstone Lake. So each of the different colors are nets set by a different gill netting crew. Here's a graphic from 2001 through 2023. And the bars are the number of lake trout that we've gill netted each year. And on the y-axis here are the number of lake trout caught each year. And this is in 50,000 fish increments, all the way up to about, well, 450 at the top here. But generally, in the last decade or more, we've been killing about 300,000 lake trout per year. Each year, we set about 5,000 or more miles of gill net in Yellowstone Lake to net the lake trout out. So our effort and the number of lake trout killed in the 2000s increased, pretty dramatically up until a point around 2012 where we finally got enough gill net set in the lake each summer to curtail further lake trout population growth. The lines on this graph are the catch per unit effort of the lake trout, where the yellow line, which peaked here early and then has declined dramatically since, that's the large mesh or the large adult lake trout in the lake. And the reduced catch per unit effort signifies sort of the reduction in the large lake trout within the lake over time. The blue line are the small mesh or the smaller lake trout from within Yellowstone Lake, and you can see that also peaked around 2012, but has remained, it's variable, but still high over time. So each of these graphs represent sort of the estimated abundance of the lake trout in Yellowstone Lake over time. In this case, from 2011 through this past year, 2022, our modeling goes, we use data from each year and model back. So this is using data from 2023, reflecting back from 2022. The large lake trout are here on the bottom graph, and you can see the dramatic decline we've forced in the large adult lake trout, the predatory lake trout in Yellowstone Lake. And the mid-sized lake trout also have declined over time. But it's these young recruiting lake trout that are still remaining abundant in the lake. And, the reason we have to continue gill netting is to make sure these young fish don't grow to be older and mature and reproductive fish and predatory fish. So these young age 2 lake trout continue to dominate our catch. The lake trout are essentially compensating for our removal efforts. And so that's why we continue to net these young ones out. What about the cutthroat trout? How are they doing after all this work? So we do annual netting assessments separate from our gill netting program with these monofilament nets that you see here. Every August, we set nets at 24 sites around Yellowstone Lake, and we do the same annual monitoring year after year after year in the same way. So we can track the population status of lake trout and cutthroat trout over time. So this is the cutthroat trout, an index of abundance, which again is called catch per unit effort here on the y-axis, going all the way back to 1980 by the standardized netting assessment. So each of these dots is the average number of cutthroat trout caught in these nets each year over time. And there's a model fit to these data, which is this curved line that you see going down and coming back up. So again, the lake trout were first discovered in 1994. As you can see, following that discovery, as the lake trout increased within the lake, the cutthroat trout really dramatically declined. And we gill netted since 1995, but again, we didn't have enough effort out there in the lake to stop the lake trout from expanding. And our extensive or really intensive gill netting began around 2012. That's when we reached that high level of effort, and the cutthroat trout that you can see have responded. These are our goals for cutthroat trout recovery, represented by these horizontal lines through here. The dash line is sort of a secondary goal, and the primary goal, where we really want to get to, is this top line, which would be at 40 fish per 100 meters of net, set by this assessment program. And you can see in recent years, we've actually, we're above our secondary goal, and in some years, we're actually surpassing our primary goal. So the cutthroat trout are really responding well to the lake trout suppression. The other thing to note about our cutthroat trout in Yellowstone Lake is that they're much bigger than they were prior to the lake trout invasion. Our fish now, an 18-inch fish now, generally weighs about twice what one would have weighed prior to the lake trout invasion. This is probably because of the reduced abundance of cutthroat in the lake and the less competition among them. We're not sure of all the mechanisms, but all I can tell you is that the fish are big and beautiful. We're pretty happy about it. And so if you're interested in catching a big cutthroat trout, Yellowstone Lake is definitely the place to come, especially early in the year. Our fishing season opens on Memorial Day weekend. And the lake will definitely be open this year. The ice is predicted to come off early. But catching a fish 22, 23, 24 inches long is not uncommon. In fact, those are I think you would say, the most abundant sizes of fish in the lake. So just to summarize Yellowstone Lake, we've killed more than 4.6 million lake trout since 1995 by our netting suppression efforts. And again, it took 17 years of time learning, producing, building up the program to finally drive the lake trout population into decline. And then it's been about another decade since that's allowed the cutthroat trout to recover to where they are today. The adult lake trout have been reduced by over 90%, but again, the recruitment of the young fish remains strong. So, this is basically a landscape scale restoration effort in the heart of Yellowstone National Park that we plan to continue into the future. This is a maintenance program now by this gill netting to maintain the cutthroat trout and restore the ecology of the system. And so at this point, it almost becomes like, you're maintaining roads, you're fixing the boilers in the buildings, you're rebuilding the walkways and the trails, all this kind of stuff that goes on in Yellowstone. Suppression of lake trout is sort of like that. It'll just continue into the future to maintain the ecosystem there. So let's shift now to the work that we've been doing on streams across the park. In Yellowstone, both West Slope cutthroat trout and Yellowstone cutthroat trout are native. Also, Arctic grayling are native in the Gallup and Madison drainages on the northwestern portion of the park. Similar to Yellowstone Lake, where non-native lake trout are the threat, here in our streams, it's primarily non-native fish that are our biggest threat to the native fish. And in some of these places, over time, the non-native fish had totally displaced or caused extirpation of the native fish, and we've been working in some of these areas to bring those natives back. So over the past couple of decades, we've done some pretty big projects in Specimen Creek, in Grayling Creek, and also in the Upper Gibbon River in the heart of the park here for West Slope cutthroat trout and Arctic grayling. The fish in Grayling Creek, especially the West Slope cutthroat trout, have responded well to our restoration efforts there. This is pretty high elevation and cold system, so you can't expect fish to get incredibly big there, right? But they're beautiful. This is a West Slope cutthroat trout caught this past summer by anglers in Grayling Creek. Arctic grayling have been brought back to Grayling Creek and also to the lakes in the upper Gibbon River system. One of those is Ice Lake, and the grayling there are now approaching 16 inches long, and they're very abundant. And Ice Lake is very close to the Grand Loop Road, where anyone can actually access it and go fishing there. These fish also drift downstream from Grebe and Wolf Lakes and the Ice Lake into the Virginia Meadows area of the Gibbon River, right along the Grand Loop Road. And the West Slope cutthroat trout and Grebe and Wolf Lakes are now, they're definitely, some of them are 20 inches long. They're phenomenal. It's a beautiful fishery now for West Slope and for Arctic grayling. In the northeastern region of the park, we work to maintain the cutthroat trout populations that we have there. Yellowstone cutthroat trout. We spent a lot of time over the years working on Soda Butte Creek, suppressing brook trout, in Slough Creek, Lower Slough Creek, Lamar River, suppressing rainbow trout and hybrids. So we do this in a variety of methods, but we electrofish and then selectively remove the rainbow trout or the hybrid fish, and then put the native cutthroat back. And the other thing that goes on in this part of the park is that anglers really help us with this effort as well. These streams, there's a lot of angling goes on in the Lamar, of course, and Slough Creek and so on. And each of these fish gets caught, pretty much every year by somebody. And if anglers can target the non-native fish the way they have, they're very much helping us with the conservation of native cutthroat trout. So this past summer, I'm not sure how brook trout got back into Upper Soda Butte Creek, but we discovered them after the flood in 2022. And then this past summer, we had to go back into Upper Soda Butte Creek and remove these non-native fish, because if they're allowed to persist, they'll outcompete and displace the cutthroat totally from that system. And so this past August, we went in and we electrofished and removed as many of the native cutthroat trout as we could, put them in a safe spot out of harm's way, and then we chemically treated Soda Butte Creek this past August, killed the brook trout that were there, and then put the cutthroat trout back. And so we did this past August, and we'll monitor this year to make sure that we got rid of all the brook trout, but we're pretty confident that we did. We're not sure how they got there, but it might have had something to do with the flood of 2022. We're not sure. This year, we're focusing our efforts on Buffalo Creek within the park. Buffalo Creek is the main source of rainbow trout and hybrids coming into the Lamar River system. So these dots that are shown on the map of the Lamar here, the lighter colored dots here, all genetically pure cutthroat trout in the headwaters of the Lamar. And then you start to see the orange coloration, those are hybrid fish down here lower in the drainage. And the red are all pure rainbow trout, where the source is in Upper Buffalo Fork Creek in the wilderness just north of the park. So these fish in Buffalo Creek drift downstream into Lower Slough Creek and Lower Lamar, and then they're invading the Upper Lamar River system over time. So what our intent is here to get rid of this source population of rainbow trout in Buffalo Creek. And this year, we're just going to treat with rotenone Buffalo Creek within the park itself, downstream from the North Park boundary all the way down to Slough Creek, and we'll do that in August. Okay, we'll shift now to a little bit discussion about angling. So we've got our new regulations for 2024. We're pretty excited. We're going to have 2 streams that remain open for year-round fishing in Yellowstone. Year-round fishing will occur on the Gardner and the Madison rivers. The Gardner River will be open year-round from Osprey Falls downstream past the Gardner River Bridge all the way down to the confluence of the Yellowstone at the park boundary here near Gardner. And the Madison River will be open year-round from the Wyoming-Montana state line downstream through the Barnes Hole area all the way to the park boundary here on the west side near West Yellowstone. So we're doing this to increase opportunities for angling, and also, you know, for a long time, this area here near West Yellowstone, where the Madison River would flow within and outside the park boundary as it winds through there, where Montana has had different regulations than Yellowstone. We're kind of coming together now where the regs are much more similar. At least the season's open at the same time. The other thing that you should know about this is because these streams are open year-round, our fishing permits now, when you buy one, will be valid for the entire calendar year. They'll be good from January 1st all the way through December 31st. So when you buy a fishing permit this spring, and the really easy way to buy a permit is just going on your phone to rec.gov, and that's a little snapshot of what it looks like to buy your fishing permit just using your phone. But when you do that this spring, your permit will be good all the way to the end of the year of December 31st. The other thing when you're out there angling, just keep in mind that we have a lot of fish tagged in the park. There are thousands and thousands of cutthroat trout tagged in Yellowstone Lake, as shown here. This one was caught in the river downstream by an angler. And you can see the yellow tag here along the back of this fish. If you catch a tagged fish, whether it be in Yellowstone Lake, the river, we have fish tagged in Lamar and Sloop Creek. We have fish tagged at Grebe and Wolf Lakes in the Gibbon River. So there's a good chance you'll catch one. And the information, if you report your tag to us, the number on the tag helps us understand movements of fish, and we're estimating abundance of fish and all that kind of stuff. So the tags look like this. And this is my phone number right here, if you want to call me or text. But a common thing that people have done when they catch a fish with a tag is they'll take a picture of it and it shows my phone number, which is great. But what we really need is the number on the other side of the tag. So like each tag has its own unique number. This one happens to be 2007. That's the number that we need you to report back to us. That number identifies that one specific fish. So just keep that in mind if you're out there angling, and it'd be great if you catch a tag fish. If you feel it's okay to take a picture, go for it. But if you can't, just try and record this number, this unique number, and then text it to me or call me. And it'll help us build our database on fish movements and abundance in the park. This is kind of what it looks like. And if you don't see that unique tag number, like this one says 0812, just look at the other side of the tag and you'll see it. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of angling is we are continuing our fly fishing volunteer program in Yellowstone. This year we have over 60 people coming up over about an 8-week span in July through September. Paul Weimer is shown here on the right side of the slide. He's our coordinator for the program. And basically, Paul leads anglers to places in the park where we need information about our native fish populations or the non-natives as well. And the anglers help us collect the fish and record the data. Sometimes we take genetic samples from these fish and so on. But this program's been going on since 2002, and we're continuing now underneath Paul's leadership. And if you're interested in signing up for next year or a future year, you can find a lot of information on our park website about how to contact Paul and get on the list. So that's what I've got, and I'm going to turn this presentation over to Mike Canetta. He leads our aquatic invasive species program in Yellowstone National Park, and he's got some updates for us to share as well. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Todd, and hello out to everyone out there. I guess I'll start by saying, what is AIS? What is an aquatic invasive species, in case not everyone knows what we're talking about here. But this is really any organism, could be a plant, could be an animal, could even be a microorganism, such as a disease like whirling disease, that is not native to this area, and when introduced has high potential to disrupt the natural ecology of the area. So it probably goes without saying that in most cases, these things are highly deleterious, and we work to prevent them from entering Yellowstone National Park. And so that is the #1 goal of our AIS program here in Yellowstone, is to ensure that we are doing everything we can to prevent new introductions of AIS into the park or the spreading of known existing AIS populations within the park. To get a grasp on what's going on with our waters, we do monitor them regularly park-wide to ensure that we have an understanding of where known AIS are, if they're spreading, and to ensure that if we do have new AIS enter, we know about it as soon as possible so that we can take actions to mitigate the impact of that. And that is particularly relevant for things like quagga and zebra mussels, which, as many people know, have been spreading across the United States for the better part of the last 4 decades. We do not have those here in the park currently, and we're working to ensure we don't get them because they can have huge impacts for aquatic ecosystems and fisheries. And finally, one of our best tools in understanding AIS and preventing their spread is education. So we have the opportunity amongst our staff to interact with thousands of boaters, anglers, and just the general public visiting the park each year to educate them about AIS, the threat they pose, and what they can do as individuals to help protect park waters. If you want to jump to the next slide, Todd. So our prevention program in the park largely comes down to the requirement that all watercraft launching in the park, whether those be motorized or non-motorized boats, be inspected prior to launching. And so we have inspectors that work at 3 different locations in the park designated on the map there, Bridge Bay, Grant, and Lewis Lake, which corresponds to the 3 locations where we have motorized boat ramps. So every boat has to be inspected before launching, and this allows us to ensure that that boat is cleaned, drained, and dry, and therefore presents little, if any, risk of transmitting AIS into park waters. So our boating season runs from the Saturday of Memorial Day each year until October 31st, and we provide watercraft inspections from 8 to 4:30 at those 3 locations for the entirety of the boating season. Couple of tools in our toolbox that have been implemented in recent years to kind of step up the level of protection for the park is, first and foremost, watercraft with ballast tanks were banned in 2019. We continue to implement that prohibition because these boats, which can carry large volumes of water within them, pose undoubtedly the highest risk of transmitting AIS within ballast water. And then additionally, starting in 2022, we implemented a decision to not allow watercraft with any evidence of live or dead quagga and zebra mussels to launch, regardless of decontamination. And this was seen as further way to protect our waters from potential AIS introductions. Next slide. And so just a little update on kind of where we're at, where we've been. In 2023, our staff inspected over 3,000 boats. That includes motorized and non-motorized. About 75% of our boat inspections were for non-motorized watercraft. So that is the predominant demographic visiting Yellowstone National Park. The vast majority of our boaters do happen to be from local states surrounding the park, so Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. In recent years, we've seen a slight decline in boating within the park, which maybe strays a little bit from what other areas are seeing, especially in the wake of the pandemic when recreational numbers were pretty much up everywhere. So a little bit down, but within a consistent range in the low 3,000s to the high 3,000s over the last decade. So we haven't seen wild swings in our boating. Of note, last year was our inspectors decontaminated 16 watercraft that either had known or suspect AIS or reasons to suspect AIS, given either dirt, plants, or standing water on those boats. So we do regularly have threats that we can identify arriving on boats to the park. And in one extreme case, our inspectors intercepted a boat that was fouled with quagga mussels. So they found those mussels, correctly denied launch to that watercraft, and potentially averted a crisis for the park and the surrounding areas. And just as part of these prevention programs and all of these interactions we have with boaters, I'll note that, again, education is huge, and this gave us an opportunity to interact with thousands of different people about boats, boating safely, and the general AIS message of clean, drain, dry. Next slide. So as the threat of AIS expands within the region, we are increasing our monitoring efforts to ensure that we are surveilling for AIS, particularly those highest priority AIS of quagga and zebra mussels. And this is really in conjunction with West-wide efforts to ensure that sampling is broadly distributed across high priority waters for the entirety of, the open season, the warm season, shall we say, when things aren't under ice here in the park. So we're really trying to ramp up these efforts to make sure we have our finger on the pulse. And that includes both widespread eDNA sampling, which is the collection of water samples from various waterways throughout the park. And then using laboratory techniques, we can actually look for the DNA of certain organisms to see if they're present. And so we're doing that primarily for quagga and zebra mussels as an early detection tool. And in addition to that, we're employing plankton sampling on Yellowstone Lake and Lewis Lake, our lakes that are open to motorized boating, to actually screen for the presence of the actual organism, the juvenile organism of quagga and zebra mussels as well. And I'm pleased to report that there were no positive detections in 2023. So we hope that trend continues for a long time. But we also do regular monitoring for AIS that we know are in the park. Todd talked about the fact that we do have non-native fish, and in many cases, in many areas in the park, we are working to remove those. But I just also wanted to point out that we have a collection of other things. So 2 non-native macroinvertebrates there, the New Zealand mud snail, of which is fairly widespread within the park, and then whirling disease, which is a disease that can impact fish and be fatal. So we do have these things in the park, and we do keep tabs on them to make sure they're not spreading or popping up in new areas. Next slide. So updates for 2024 of significance pertain largely to 2 new regulations that will go into effect with the start of the boating season this year on May 25th. So the first of which is a fairly significant update to our boating regulations here in the park. And we will now be requiring a 30-day dry time for certain watercraft. And this will apply to all sailboats and certain complex motorized boats. And so there you'll see inboard, outboard, and inboard jet watercraft, in addition to sailboats, will now be required to observe a 30-day dry time before being allowed to launch in Yellowstone waters. And this is really a heightened level of protection now for the park in response to new detections of quagga and zebra mussels within the region. Of particular concern is now the known population and potential establishment of quagga mussels in the Snake River of Idaho, just 4 hours from the park boundary. So important to note that to verify that your boat, potentially, if you're bringing one of these boats, has met this dry time requirement, your boat will need to be sealed. And the seal is pictured there on the right side of the slide. I don't think many people are probably familiar with this unless you're an avid boater, but different agencies use seals to communicate that a boat has been inspected and has passed an inspection. And so a tamper-proof seal with wire can be applied to a boat between the boat and its trailer, and that will be intact unless a boat has launched and broken that seal and wire. So this shows us the boat has not launched since that inspection. The park will be honoring seals that we issue here in Yellowstone, as well as from the states of Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. So those seals, along with the receipt that was issued at the time that seal was applied, will be required to show 30 days since that inspection to achieve that dry time requirement and launch in the park if you are bringing one of these types of watercraft. Next slide. And then one additional regulation change is that we will now prohibit the launch of any motorized or non-motorized watercraft with a history of mussel fouling, regardless of the dry time or any previous decontamination. So this is an update to our regulations on how we handle mussel-fouled boats. We are implementing this as an additional layer of protection for park waters, and it gives us the opportunity to reduce the chance of fouling in our waters from these organisms, but also from potentially their DNA, which can be carried on boats. If we were to have repeated detections of environmental DNA for quagga zebra mussels, it would potentially jeopardize not only our monitoring program, but park operations like lake trout removal on Yellowstone Lake and public recreational opportunities as we grapple with what to do with this information and how to proceed. So that's all for AIS updates. Before we conclude, I just wanted to highlight our partner, Yellowstone Forever. They have been a humongous supporter of the fisheries work we have done in Yellowstone Lake for nearly 2 decades, over 2 decades, and continue to support efforts throughout the park to restore native fish. So we couldn't do this without them.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Todd. We now have time for Mike and Todd to answer questions. If you have not submitted your questions into the Q&A box just yet, please do so at this time. So let's start with our first question. All right, last year we fished the Upper Gallatin River off the Bighorn Pass Trail, staying at Backcountry Campsite WB1. We were quite surprised we did not see a fish, let alone catch one. So can you speak to that?
I sure can. Am I live now, Ashton? Okay. So the Gallatin is low density fishery for sure. And it's an extremely cold stream. I think the best time to fish the Gallatin might be midsummer, but early and late, I think the fishing can be pretty tough on the Upper Gallatin River. There are definitely fish up there, but as long as I've been here, they've always been really low density up in there. So I'm sorry you didn't see a fish, but they're there.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. Do trout migrate in Nez Perce Creek away from the geothermal area near the fire hole in the heat of the summer?
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of work on the fire hole for quite a long time. I know studies that occurred in the early mid-1990s documented the movement of fish out of the warmer waters of the fire hole into Nez Perce Creek, and we have no reason to think that that's changed. But I think that's a good assumption.
All right. So are lake trout spawning at a younger age as they compensate for adult loss?
That's a great question. In a population like the lake trout we have in Yellowstone Lake that are undergoing suppression, it's similar to a fishery, for commercial fisheries and that kind of stuff. A lot of times you'll see the population and fish within the population shifting to spawning at an earlier age or size. And we're studying that right now actively. To this point, we haven't documented the shift, but the last 2 summers we've been collecting lake trout and examining the eggs in this fish and looking at the reproductive capability of the different fish at the different sizes. And so that information will be coming out in the next couple of years, but there's definitely a good chance that some of them are spawning at a younger age.
Okay, thanks, Todd. All right, next question. I've read where the average temperatures in the Rockies have increased more with global warming than other parts of the U.S. Are you seeing any effects of this on fish populations in the park?
You know, so things are getting warmer in Yellowstone for sure. And last summer, for example, the Lamar River, we have criteria for angling closures in Yellowstone. And again, last summer, we came really close to having to implement closures in the park due to high stream temperatures. We have not seen evidence of fish kills in a long, long time. Not to say that that maybe isn't going on in some of these, warmer days of the heat of the summer, but no one's contacted us, and us as biologists, we have not seen dead fish in recent years. That's about the best answer I can give on that one.
All right, thanks, Todd. All right, next question will be about brook trout otoliths. Any information to share about that?
So otoliths are ear bones within the fish. I think this question is about the brook trout that were in Upper Sotheby Creek that we got rid of last summer. And no, we have not looked at those otoliths yet to see. You can use the ear bones of the fish. In some cases, you can look at the chemistry of the ear bones and sort of help you identify maybe where the fish came from in the past. But no, we have not looked at those yet.
Okay, next question. Will you be working with Montana to clean Upper Buffalo Creek?
So I think this is referring to, we're going to do a rotenone treatment on Buffalo Creek this year, just within the park. But there's also a proposal to do the treatment in the watershed upstream of the park in the wilderness. And the hope is that that can happen in future years. It just won't happen in 2024. So yes, we are working with Montana and the Forest Service on that project in the future.
Okay, thanks, Todd. All right, next question. Do anglers comply with non-release of non-native fish where required?
Yeah, so this, we have regulations on Yellowstone Lake, for example. If you catch a lake trout, it's mandatory that you harvest it, or at least you don't put it back in the lake alive. Similarly, we have regulations on the Lamar, where if you catch a rainbow trout, similarly, we want you to harvest that fish. So the question is, are anglers complying with these regulations? And I've heard both. There's strong support by some people to remove the non-native fish when they catch them in these waters. But I've also heard some people say, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, is that following the law? No. But I mean, I know both things go on out there. Yeah. But the hope is over time, more and more people can help us with these efforts, angling removal of non-natives to preserve and conserve our native fish is a huge help to us.
All right. Will there be protections for brown trout? And if not, why?
Yeah, good question. So this would probably be a question that has to do with keeping the Gardner open year-round and the Madison near West Yellowstone open year-round. And for now, we have no plans to change our regulations regarding brown trout in these streams. To be honest, I don't know of many fish that really ever get harvested, even during the normal time of the year on the Gardner, and I live right here year-round, and I don't see it. If there are people that are seeing excessive harvest, please let me know. But we don't anticipate that's going to happen. So for now, we're not changing any regulations regarding brown trout in these streams or other places in the park.
Okay, thanks, Todd. All right. How will Yellowstone regulations be enforced in year-round areas?
In the same way the regulations, I guess, are enforced through the rest of the year in the park. We have law enforcement that are out there all the time. And other anglers that are probably even better better eyes and ears for us. If something negative is going on out there, you can contact the park and let us know. But they'd be enforced in the same way as they are elsewhere, I guess, throughout the year.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Next question. How goes the progress of the cutthroat and grayling restoration work done in the Gibbon River a few years ago? And how are those fish doing in the river itself?
So I talked a little bit about that in the presentation, and I showed a few photos of the fish in the Upper Gibbon River. I guess from our perspective, it's been a phenomenal success. And anglers that are heading up there, going fishing up in there, are enjoying, some really great native fishing, fishing for native fish. And so I guess they're doing great. And the river, the West Slope and grayling are drifting downstream from the headwater lakes in the Gibbon. And I know some of the West Slope and grayling are being caught all the way downstream as far as the Madison River.
All right, next question. Will the rotenone treatment affect fishing on Slough Creek below the campground?
During the time of our treatment of Buffalo Creek, it'll take about a week. It's time to do that treatment. And at the downstream end of Buffalo Creek, just upstream of the campground, we'll detox the rotenone in the stream. And during that time that we're detoxing the rotenone, that will extend, it's called potassium permanganate that we use, and that will extend into Slough Creek below the campground for a ways. So during that time we do the treatment, the fishing will be affected downstream of the campground. But just during that week of time or so that we're working in Buffalo Creek. And we'll announce the dates of that treatment, but right now we're looking at in the coming months, but right now we're looking at probably the third week of August for that treatment. So that's when that reach of Slough Creek will be affected.
Okay, next question is about brook trout and Soda Butte. Do you know how many were removed? Maybe a ballpark number?
Yeah, about a dozen fish of different sizes, unfortunately. But yeah, about a dozen brook trout were removed.
All right. Can you comment on access, fish populations, and types of fish in the Tower Creek drainage? Access has been difficult with the campground closed for the past couple of years.
Yeah, Tower Creek is a challenging place to get up into. If you want to get way up into Tower Creek, the trail doesn't go very far. So you got to be ready to cross deadfall and all that kind of stuff. But there are unfortunately a lot of brook trout in Tower Creek, and there's also hybridized cutthroat trout up in Tower Creek. Those are the two species that are up there.
All right, next question is about Cisco in Yellowstone Lake. What's the latest?
So we haven't caught, so Cisco are a preferred prey of lake trout in their native range, and they're not native at all to Montana or Yellowstone, that's for sure. And in 2019, our gilleting boats captured a live Cisco out in the northern part of the lake. And we've monitored for Cisco since, but we have not found any evidence of other fish out there. But we do know that Cisco we caught through otolith microchemistry that was brought up before. We know that Cisco that was caught in Yellowstone Lake was actually born in Yellowstone Lake. So there's a good chance there's other fish out there, but we have yet to find one.
Next question is about the new year-round fishing opportunities. And will there be other bodies of water in the park? Is the Park Service considering that? Yeah.
So we're starting this kind of small, the opportunities for year-round fishing in the park. And we're starting it, where there's fairly good wheeled vehicle access. That's why we're starting with the Gardner and the Madison in the places we are. And we're just going to monitor to see how this goes for everybody. There is a chance maybe in the future that some of this could be expanded. But for right now, we're starting small and we're going to keep it that way, just to see how things go. But in the future, there could be maybe that will change. Maybe there'll be additional waters open. We'll just have to see.
All right, thanks, Todd. Okay, next question. Why have the cutthroat in Heart Lake been seemingly less affected by Lakers compared to Yellowstone Lake? And any plans for lake trout control at Heart Lake?
So that there are cutthroat trout in Heart Lake. There's a lot of cutthroat trout in Heart Lake, actually. There's also non-native lake trout there that invaded Heart Lake after they were introduced to Lewis Lake in the late 1800s. But the Upper Snake River's got a much more diverse fish community. There are more prey species in Heart Lake for the lake trout, and that's one hypothesis that we have that maybe the cutthroat can do better with the lake trout in that lake. That there's other prey fish in Heart Lake that the lake trout can also target, whereas in Yellowstone Lake that's not the case necessarily. That's just a hypothesis. And are we going to do any control in Heart Lake? No, no plans for that at all. Yeah. There's some big lake trout in Heart Lake. There's also some really big lake trout in Lewis Lake, if you're interested in fishing big lake trout. We have no plans to do suppression in those lakes anytime soon. We have our hands full on Yellowstone Lake.
All right, yes, we do. Okay, next question will be about year-round fishing opportunities in the Gardner area. So will the gate on the old Gardner Road remain in place despite new year-round fishing opportunities?
Yeah, so the gates will remain on what I think they're talking about is the road that's now washed out probably. And the gates will remain on the downstream end near the park gate and up here at Mammoth. So you'll have to access the Gardner from those two spots. Yeah. So it'd be a little more of a hike involved than there would have been in the past before we lost our road. Unfortunately.
Okay, next question. Are active measures to interfere with lake trout spawning beds continuing?
Yeah, I didn't talk about it today, but in past years I've shown that we target lake trout embryos on their spawning sites in the fall. The lake trout spawn in mid to late September in Yellowstone Lake. And then we've been treating some of these sites with organic material to kill the eggs. And we're going to continue that work again this year and probably for the next 3 or 4 years into the future on key spawning sites within the lake. Trying to reduce that large recruitment that we're seeing in the lake trout, those small fish that keep coming back. We're trying to reduce that by treating these spawning sites.
Okay, next question. Did the impact of the floods have any long-term impact on the fisheries in general, or is it as if it never happened?
So in the northern part of the park where we had the massive flood in 2022, you know, I think the fish densities definitely were down. But the fish that remained were really healthy and in good condition. The cutthroat are very chunky, I guess you'd say, afterwards. Again, probably because there were a few of them out there this past year. The invertebrates are doing well and all that. I think most people that I hear talking about the effects of the flood, though, not so much on the fish populations, but on the habitat. The Gardner River, the Lamar River, Slough Creek. I mean, people's favorite fishing spots, and a lot of that has just changed. A lot of those holes where you'd find fish before are just gone. It's totally rearranged, and it's not to say that it won't, you know, it's just a new situation that, you know, over time people just have to get used to. But that's sort of the biggest thing that I hear about the flood, not so much the densities of fish, but the habitat and the way it changed for everybody fishing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Next question is about cutthroat trout in Yellowstone streams. What is their typical lifespan?
Yeah, I think in the streams of the park, you'd have to say 6 or 7 years old would be a pretty old cutthroat in the smaller cold water streams. When you get to the lake, though, a lot of our fish in Yellowstone Lake will live to be upwards of 12 or 13 years. They just have a little bit better environment there to live and grow. So, but that'd be a good guess.
All right. Do we have any updates on the angler survey program that no longer exists?
Yeah, so we had a card that everybody would get when you buy a fishing permit in the past, and you could fill out, what fish you caught, how big they were you satisfied with your trip, and that kind of stuff, and then send that to us. But from the Washington level within the Park Service, over time we lost our permission to do that survey, and we're working now with folks at the Washington level and service wide to get that back on track again. It's not going to be this year, but the hope is that we'll get the survey back next year, because that's really valuable data for us for sure. That programming extended all the way back to the 1970s as a long running database of angler data that we're trying to get back on track. It's a good question.
Okay, thanks, Todd. All right, next up is All right, let's go ahead and go to why is prevention of the introduction of zebra and quagga mussels important, and what could the impacts be? Can you show the slide with regulation number 2 on previously fouled watercraft again?
Okay, I'll back it up to that slide.
So I can take that one there. And zebra and quagga mussels have the potential to transform ecosystems, and that's something we've seen across the eastern and midwestern United States. And unfortunately, they are encroaching further west, and we're seeing new detections basically annually. Western states have largely done a really great job of safeguarding Western waters. We've had the benefit of time on our side and been able to implement prevention programs before these things became established. But they can have widespread impacts on ecology, infrastructure, and recreation, probably unlike any other aquatic invasive species we've seen in the United States. So they've become the highest priority for most AIS prevention programs. And we would be concerned with an introduction about the potential for the complete kind of changing of our aquatic systems from the bottom up, the food base changing, and then ultimately the impacts that could have on native fisheries, which we are mandated to protect, and we've spent a lot of time working to conserve and restore. So the impacts on ecology could be quite significant. Infrastructure, the impacts are fairly well known. Quagga and zebra mussel cause upwards of hundreds of millions into the billions of dollars of economic damage throughout the United States each year. Damage to water systems, boat docks, anything that touches the water that's infested can become fouled and unusable and in need of constant repair. And then another concern for us would be how this might impact not just park operations, but public recreational opportunities. Should we have a detection or infestation in the park, given our geographic situation at the headwaters of the Yellowstone, the Upper Missouri, and the Upper Snake River, we would have to consider pretty drastic changes to recreation to ensure that we were preventing further spread. But ultimately, because these organisms can drift downstream, they would have the potential to move into downstream states unimpeded. And so being at the headwaters of everything kind of takes us up a notch in terms of how seriously we need to work to prevent quagga or zebra introduction.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We're just about out of time, so there's one more question here. Does the park have any concerns over any specific AIS coming to park waters beyond zebra and quagga mussels and those already present? Are measures being considered to limit them?
Yeah, so quagga and zebra mussels are our focus because we understand them to have the potential greatest impact. But our program is all taxa, so we don't want to see any AIS becoming established in Yellowstone National Park. The methods we deploy in inspecting and decontaminating watercraft are effective against all taxa. So whether that be quagga and zebra mussels or invasive plants like curly leaf pondweed or Eurasian water milfoil. So we are working to prevent the introduction of everything. And this is also why education is a huge component of our efforts, because a lot of those other things like plants can be brought in by means other than boats, say recreational equipment, angling equipment. And so we are trying to get the message out of clean, drain, dry, because we know that is effective at preventing the transmission of most AIS from one water body to another.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. I think we're just about out of time here. So again, thank you, Todd, and thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for attending our meeting today. As a quick reminder, the recording of today's presentation will be available on the park's fish management page by tomorrow. So if you know of anyone who was unable to join us today, please share a link with them, which you can find in the Q&A box. And we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.